So I know that this can be done in 10 years if we want it to be. There's no doubt that people understand the climate emergency.
But it's real, it's going to work, and more importantly, that it can be done at the same cost as onshore wind.
Turns out it was using a lot of energy, and I'm officially an energy expert, but I didn't look at the lamp in my corner.
Hi, welcome to Emissions Impossible. I'm Kim McAllister.
And I'm Marika Schmidt.
Everybody get up.
So I'm a broadcast journalist, and Marika, you have a really cool job because you work with Innovate UK. Tell me about your job.
Yes, I'm head of innovation and I work for the Prospering from the Energy Revolution Challenge. It's a huge program that Innovate UK is running, and it's all about the future of smart local energy systems.
Excellent. Now, this is something I'm really interested in because I've been working from home now for 2 years. I have never been more aware of how many light bulbs are needlessly burning in my home. Is this something you've heard a lot?
Yes, I think people are becoming more aware of what they're using at home, electricity and gas. Obviously, spending considerable amount of time in the home means that you look out for these things a lot more. And I think it's quite interesting how people are starting to think about energy savings that they can make as well within their home.
I think we're all pretty good at switching off the lights, only having the heating on when you need it, using your thermostat, perhaps a smart system. Do you feel like we're at that level now, or do you think we still need to be encouraging people to do these basics before we start talking about futuristic solutions?
I think we need to do a lot more. It's not just about saving energy. It's not using it in the first instance as well. So, I would like to encourage people to do a lot more. And it's often very simple things you can do to make your home more energy efficient. And I'm a member of a local group here in Addingham, the Environment Group. And very interesting when you start to use things like energy monitors and smart meters to see what happens. People become a lot more aware of what they're using. Also, they start to check which appliances are actually using the most, and they're starting to switch them off, or they're starting to replace them. So to give you an example for my own home, working at home meant sort of having an office at home, and there was a big lamp in the corner. Turns out it was using a lot of energy, a lot of electricity, and replaced it with LED, and now it's a lot better. It costs me a lot less, but I wasn't that aware of this before we started with home working. So yeah, it really changed, I think, the way I see things myself as well in my own home. And I'm officially an energy expert, but I didn't look at the lamp in my corner to start with, to be honest with you. So here you go. I think these are simple things that everyone can do, but also, obviously, that the harder things are still to come. UK has one of the worst sort of building stocks in Europe. There's loads we need to do, ranging from heat pumps through to external wall insulation. And this isn't always easy to do. So I'm personally quite passionate about really moving this forward and to make people's home a lot more comfortable, a lot warmer, and also save them energy if we can at the same time.
Yeah, it's so tied into so many different things as well, including your health, your mental health, your physical health, how capable you are to work. If you're in a cold home, my goodness, that just makes everything so much more difficult. And I think there's a huge push to retrofit homes, isn't there, with better insulation, and particularly council housing stock, which is very drafty, or maybe the doors aren't fitting properly. There's a big job there, isn't there?
There is, and it's we really have to move forward with it. And it's often a number of measures that need to be applied. And that's not easy because it's construction works. And as we all know from sort of home renovations, it's disruptive. And so, I'd like to encourage people to do more of it. And I'd like to make it as easy as we can for people to do this and to buy into the whole idea.
And if you see a cheaper energy bill at the end of it, then hey, that's a good thing all round, right? Especially with Christmas coming.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we need to find better solutions for our planet and for our pocket. So we've spoken to 3 fantastic experts for this episode who are going to tell us not just about what's happening in the future, but what's happening right now. And I find this really inspiring. So I wanted to start by introducing Lee Chambers from the Active Building Centre, because he has worked with the council to create a housing project which is exactly the same price as a regular housing project, but it's net zero.
The Active Building Centre was commissioned by Flintshire Council to do a piece of work pre-planning to help the council get to net zero carbon homes. And the premise was that we would use the skill set of the Active Building Centre, which is a government-funded research and technology organisation funded under the Transforming Construction Challenge, to try and help the council, the architect, the parties involved to change the way they did things so that to enable net zero carbon buildings from the very start of the process, as opposed to trying to make it happen halfway through, which is what normally happens. Luckily, Flintshire Council were very proactive and got us involved right at the very early stages with the architect. So we were able to influence development in ways that have not really been done before. For example, we reorientated the site. We helped the architect with changing the designs. Things like overhang for eaves was changed. Chimneys were removed that served no real useful purpose. Detailed assessments were done on the ability of the houses to generate their own energy by adding things like solar PV. Fabric improvements have been suggested that will come through in the next phase. Things like overheating in the summer was assessed as well, because a lot of homes now are prone to overheating as well as underheating, if you like. So that assessment was done and things were changed to make sure the homes are comfortable, warm and affordable all the way through. If you were to build a standard house now to the current planning regulations and the current Part L regulations, you would expect these houses to use maybe around 8,000 kilowatt hours a year to heat and light the homes. The aspiration for Flintshire was to improve on that, and they already had policies in place to make a better home than is the standard. Flintshire's improvements are about 26% better than the current Part L standards for heating and energy efficiency. So their energy consumption is down to maybe 7,000 kilowatt hours a year predicted, which is about an energy bill of £1,000 a year. So about, roughly £100 a month, really. So after we'd done our initial assessments and we'd made recommendations and the council had taken up those recommendations, our projection is that these new active homes will in fact have a positive energy generation. In other words, they'll be exporting energy onto the grid, not using it. And the energy bills will really only result in a small standing charge. So they'll be very, very energy efficient, very low cost to run, if any cost at all, and warm, comfortable, healthy homes for people who are in social housing that may well be suffering from fuel poverty.
Yeah. So how many houses were in this development?
This particular development, there's 20, and
Right.
there's 4 different archetypes of houses. So they range from sort of a 3-bed house for a family to some flats as well. The basis of the whole principle was to create a blueprint for high density social housing that could be used across any local authority or housing association that was building this type of home. We predict that the active homes will be 124% improvement over the current building energy use standards.
That's incredible. What a huge benefit and a great result for you. So was this what you hoped for, or was there still an element of, we'll need to see how this works out?
Well, I think as we go through the next few phases of the project and it becomes, gets towards being built on site, that we'll actually refine the models as we're going along with the council. But I suspect we will see a bigger increase than that.
Is this the first development of its kind? Is this a kind of a pilot project?
No. The Active Building Centre has been involved in a few. This is an evolution of something we've done before along a smaller development in Wales. It's also an evolution. It's an evolution of the methodology for doing it and the method of doing it rather than it is. You can build zero carbon homes now, but that's only the top 1% of all homes is being built zero carbon.
And you want to make it much more achievable for the regular person.
Exactly. We want to make it accessible to everybody. We want to make sure that, people who need it most are those that benefit most. We also want to make sure that, we create something that it's easy to follow for an architect and M&E consultants and councils, local authorities, housing associations to actually be bold and take the next step and make sure that their developments will no longer need to be upgraded 10 years from now. Because currently, homes that are being built now are likely to need upgrading 10 years from now.
It just doesn't make any sense, does it?
No, it makes no sense at all. I mean, we can already build zero carbon homes. Why aren't we?
Wow. So if there's no financial burden of doing it this way, then surely it should just be the way.
Yeah, that's what the Active Builders Centre was put here to do. We're funded by Transforming Construction Challenge. We're the bridge between industry and academia, and our whole purpose is to push towards net zero carbon using intelligent energy systems and connected buildings. There are next steps for Flintshire that we're going to consider with the council in terms of making it an energy community, so that any excess energy could be then traded on the grid to turn a cost into a revenue. But that's for a little bit further down the line. Again, this is stuff that can already be done. Yeah, it's not pie in the sky or fantasy. We've already done this. This has already been done. There are projects out there where energy communities exist. What we're trying to do is bring them all together into one place to make sense of it all, so that everybody has an opportunity to build back better,
to coin a phrase. Well, the other big part of the energy transition is that it has to be a just transition, right? It can't just leave parts of society behind. So that what you're doing seems to fit that perfectly as well.
We're aiming at the people that need it most, so there is other implications for the blueprint we've created in terms of upgrading existing buildings. So going into upgrading existing buildings is a bit more technically more complicated because you've got what you've got. With a new build, obviously, you can make a lot of changes pre-planning that can determine the destiny of the site. Obviously, with existing buildings, it is a little bit more of a challenge, but it still can be done.
Have you had interest from other parts of the country then? Are people looking at this going, why can't we do this?
Yeah, we have. I mean, we developed this particular methodology with Flintshire because they commissioned us to do it, and we were effectively learning on the job. As we move through the closing parts of this particular development, it's fairly likely we'll be doing another one. And once we have all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle in exactly the right format, we will be, basically taking this out to everyone who could benefit from it.
So that was Lee Chambers from Active Building Centre, and it's great that he's working with the local authorities to make these housing developments so much more environmentally friendly. Is this something that you're seeing a lot of, Marika?
Yes, we have quite a number of local authorities that are part of the Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme. And the reason why that is they have a really important role in terms of enabling local action. I'm personally very passionate about it and have been really trying hard to drive the whole agenda around local authorities forwards. So we've got a number of pieces of work going on around this. The first one is a toolkit that we are developing with the Energy Systems Catapult, which is to really help local authorities to develop and deliver low carbon measures on the ground. It's not as easy as it sounds. It's often very complex projects. If you just think about your own home, it can range from installing a heat pump through to batteries, through to solar, replacing the windows. So we're looking at that because councils play a really important role in all of this. They have planning powers, but also often with large programs to support vulnerable people. They are the ones that are often enabling that at the local level. So we're working with quite a number of councils at the moment, really trying to sort of establish best practice. How do you do this type of program? If it's several houses, housing stock that a council owns, or where there's a social housing association that owns it, how can you make this work? How can you scale this? What are the solutions for the future? And how can we support that in a better way? Because councils are crucial.
It sounds like they're on board, that they're looking for this support.
Yeah, it's very interesting because most councils have declared a climate emergency. And so it's key now that we look at how this can be delivered. And obviously, energy is a very important theme that councils are looking at. And in terms of where we need to get to is we need to have large-scale investment programs to support all of this in the longer term, because we need to really refurbish the whole building stock, ideally for the UK, if we want to achieve our climate targets.
Well, this is the perfect time to bring in Barbara Hammond, because that's someone that you've been working with Project Leo. What's been your involvement with Project Leo?
So Leo is one of the projects that we funded. It's very exciting because we're combining several technologies at the local level, and we're bringing it together for the customer. So it becomes a service that we're providing for the customer to save them energy. A project that's very much on the forefront of smart energy developments, and I'm very proud of what they've achieved in a very short period of time.
Great. Well, here's Barbara to tell us more about it.
So Project Leo, the LEO stands for Local Energy Oxfordshire. And what we're trying to do, working with SSEN, our distribution network operator, our 2 universities, local councils, and a range of businesses, is to work out how we can accommodate a doubling of electricity demand as we move to electric heat and electric transport that is supplied by intermittent renewables. And all of that happening at the grid edge, with lots of renewables, in your local area that you probably see: ground mount solar, rooftop solar, wind, hydro. At the same time as you're thinking about, how do I change to a heat pump? How do I change to an EV? So it's about how we accommodate all of that on the grid and how we help people to make that transition.
It sounds so sensible. I just love the kind of concept, because we should all be working together to be more efficient. That's just common sense, isn't it? But I'm sure it's much more tricky in practice.
It is more tricky in practice. But yeah, you're right. What we need to do is to be producing and using as much of what we produce, every household, every business, and then working out how we share or trade the import and export across our meter. And so how we provide flexibility to the grid, how we save in our own household or business, reduce our demand as far as possible, how we then shift that use to the times where the grid needs us to use it, when they're producing a lot and the demand is lower. And then, having done that, how we can then share or trade the excess with people in our local area. Sounds very sensible. When you explain it to people like that, they go, yep, that's great. I really understand. I want to know what to do to help the climate emergency. Now what do I do? And you go, right, okay. So thing number one, the distribution network operators who own and run our local electricity networks need to understand much more about what's actually happening on their grid. Because until now, they've been running our local network according to standard models, where we all put on the kettle in the morning, go to work, put it on in the evening. It's going to change as we start heating our homes with electricity and charging up our EVs. And we need to avoid doing that during those peak hours, basically.
Yeah.
But they haven't been monitoring it. So they don't know in real time actually what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that Leo is doing is putting monitors into their secondary substations, which is the low voltage network, so that they can start seeing that data and then sharing that data. And it's fascinating what we're getting out of that so far. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, they need to get used to sharing that data in the most transparent way possible, so that organisations like us who work with communities across Oxfordshire and households across Oxfordshire can help our people to understand what to do about that. Thirdly, they need to be putting a lot more people into the teams that then work with real people who want to do real projects, so that there's a discussion about what you can do to connect to the grid, rather than a sort of blanket yes or no, which is what you tend to get at the moment.
Yeah.
Then we need to understand how to get the data from our own meters inside our own households. And by the way, the meter you have in your household isn't owned by you.
Oh.
And there's a question as to whether the data it produces is owned by you. So we've got to get all of that.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing that we have to do is to work out within all of that data gathering and understanding, how do you make all of the appliances and the energy generation that increasingly we do, and the EVs and the heat pumps, how do we make them smart so that they can tell when the energy system needs them to turn up or down?
Gosh.
So all of that is what we're tackling in Project Leo, and it's been absolutely fascinating, right from the sort of pure innovation technology end to the how do we talk to people end. And I do not kid you, it has taken us about 18 months to work out what people do and don't know and how to explain it in ways that they understand.
Oh, I can actually believe that, actually, because there's a lot of myths out there. And then I imagine with COVID and the lockdowns and people now working from home, it's changed everything hugely anyway. So was this project in the works before the COVID pandemic, or was it as a response to the pandemic?
No, it was in the works, and we had actually started it before the pandemic. And then we had to work, we had to move sort of like that into COVID mode, which worked really well. I mean, it has worked brilliantly well. Even with our communities and households, we've been able to work out COVID safe ways of doing things. So all of that's been fine. What the issue that we're facing sort of as we move into this phase of COVID is all of those issues about supply chain and labour. So it's taken a bit longer. We've been given a bit more time to do the project. But I think we should be really clear that Leo was always going to be the first 3 years of at least a 10-year programme. And I think what we've learned is that was absolutely true. And so we won't have solved it, but we will have done some big things to understand how to solve it.
And potentially done the work for the rest of us who don't live in Oxfordshire, so that we can start to roll out our own programmes, hopefully. Is that part of the plan?
Absolutely. I mean, the Low Carbon Hub that I run is a social enterprise that has to legally run for the benefit of the community. So part of our mission is to completely share all of that in an open source way. And I know that SSEN want to do that with the work that they're doing. So, it's got to be about sharing and about us learning from the brilliant projects that other people are doing as well. So absolutely.
So I'm getting excited now because I'm geographically quite far from Oxfordshire. I'm in Edinburgh. I guess that would be the Lothians if you were talking about a county. How quickly, I mean, you may not have the answer to this, but how quickly do you think something like this could take hold and start to be rolled out across communities across the UK?
Personally, I have two ways of looking at that, at least. Might be three as we talk it through. So thing number one is that I was working in what was then the Department of Trade and Industry back in the early 2000s, and I ran the UK Renewable Energy Programme. And so I funded the first offshore wind farms, and I got the money for the next set of offshore wind farms. And then it took about another 15 years to get to the point where we had the auction where
15 years, Barbara, my goodness.
Yeah, but it was just such a red letter day for me when offshore wind beat nuclear in the auction in 2017. And then you look at what's happened since the feed-in tariff came in 2010. I mean, it's just light years different from where it was in the early 2000s in 20 years. 10 years since the feed-in tariff, and look at what's happened with the sort of explosion of renewables right. So I know that this can be done in 10 years if we want it to be. And that is the real question. There's no doubt that people understand the climate emergency and want to do something about it and want to do their bit. But they don't know what to do. They want whatever they do to be fair and to be done by other people. And they want help in doing that. And I think that's the question. How do we use the experience of Project Leo and other projects like it to understand how to make that collective effort happen in a fair and just way in the time that we've got to do it. And I think that is what is going to take local leadership and national leadership.
So that was Barbara Hammond from Project Leo, and it sounds fantastic and sounds like it could be a real pilot scheme for a lot of different parts of the UK as well.
Yeah, agree. And ideally, we would like to scale this project. And obviously, that's one of the purposes as well of the Prospering from the Energy Revolution, to demonstrate these projects and then to look at how we can replicate them and how we can scale them in other parts of the UK. That's the whole purpose, really, of the programme.
I'll look forward to seeing the results of that. And just before we finish, we have to do a little bit of future gazing, because these are great. These are things that are happening right now that are revolutionising things as we speak. But in the future, we could be talking about heating entire cities from the thermal power from nuclear reactors. Now, my brain just exploded. But we do have Harry Keeling from Rolls-Royce with us to explain a bit more about it. So I'll let him explain what's going on here.
A very, very simple way of looking at any kind of power production in the UK or worldwide is you essentially have a very big kettle. You heat up the water, you turn it to steam, that steam then turns a turbine, and then fantastic, you create electricity. And nuclear power is no different. And instead of using fossil fuels to create that heat, to turn the water to steam, your kettle, you're using a nuclear reaction. Now, that heat, you can do lots of things with that. And one of those is, rather than turn that heat into electricity, and actually you have some losses, some inefficiencies with that process, but electricity is the medium, that's the currency of our energy today. But what you can do instead is take that heat directly from the reactor through obviously several steps, and then put that heat directly into the UK's homes. And in fact, this is something that is done in Eastern Europe fairly regularly, where you'll have a nuclear power plant which then heats up a water circuit, and that heated water is then shuttled into the surrounding area and all of the homes associated with that. And what that means is you suddenly don't have to have a load of boilers in everyone's houses, save quite a lot of space for a start. But crucially, at a stroke, you remove any of the fossil fuels required for all of the heating of those houses. And that can be houses, it could be your schools, it can be anything. Suddenly you have this very, very cheap supply of heat. And the crucial, or the really sort of useful thing here is that heat is just a byproduct. It's just it's the equivalent of the exhaust from power generation.
Yeah.
And actually that heat would tend to be essentially thrown away in a sort of normal model, because it's not needed. You create your electricity and that's all you want. Fantastic. Yeah. But actually there's a means here to take that waste heat and instead use it. And so it's free heat. That means that all of your homes in the surrounding area then have access to it. And we think that's something that's not only very much doable, but actually we've got this amazing moment in the UK where we're looking at the existing housing stock. We're trying to understand how we can make all of ourselves more efficient. And yes, in some cases, we'll add more insulation to our lofts or put double glazing in. But actually, when we're looking at new estates, new homes, new areas, actually, by designing in this kind of heating system from the outset, at a stroke, you can have thousands of houses that are carbon free. I was looking at some numbers from last year, looking at how much electricity I produce this year. And actually, the electricity, turning my switches on and off, is only about 15% of my total energy usage. 15%. 45% of that is my heating and my eating. Yeah. And another sort of 40-ish% is my transport. Mm-hmm. So it's great if you can sort out making the electricity I turn on green, and clearly that's really important. But getting the heating sorted, it is the biggest portion of my CO2 emissions. And that's why I think when we look at producing green, clean hydrogen, it's going to be so important. But actually, we need to have all of the tools in our armory being used, and residential heating using the sort of the waste heat from a nuclear plant is, for me, just a very sensible thing to do.
And so what is Rolls-Royce working on then, and how has that been supported by UKRI funding?
The Rolls-Royce SMR programme has been in activity since about 2016, when it became really apparent that climate change is just going to be worse than we thought, and therefore what we need to do to combat it and beat it is go after everything as much as we possibly can. Yeah. Now, Rolls-Royce has a wealth of experience in the nuclear industry, and we've been creating nuclear power plants, small nuclear power plants, since the 1960s for the UK's defence submarine fleet. So we've got a huge wealth of experience. And then there was this fantastic coming together that actually we can take that experience and do it to help combat climate change. And in 2019, we received 18 million of funding, which we then match funded. So it was sort of 38 million in total, which was allow us to look at the design of the plant and look at it in anger of how we could use it. So would we use it just for electricity? Could we use it for producing clean hydrogen, for residential heating, for creating synthetic fuel, for desalination? Water is probably going to become increasingly important over the next 100 years, and how we create that in lots of vast quantities is important. But that funding has allowed us to really progress the design and to understand that it's real, it's going to work, and more importantly, that it can be done at the same cost as onshore wind and the normal green energy sources that we need. And that's important, because what we can't do is produce something that is, yes, it's a great scientific solution, but commercially it doesn't make sense. If you're industry, if you need to produce the vast amounts of hydrogen that this hydrogen economy is likely to need, it's got to be competitive. It's got to be cheap. And it was in 2019, 2020, running the numbers, that it became really apparent for us that it was, and that this was real. And we're now just in the final stages of moving into our next big phase of work, where we'll receive close to £500 million in development funding, half of which, or just under half of which, will hopefully come from the government, and then just over half of which will come from Rolls-Royce and our partners in helping to develop this. And then the real challenge is, how can we do it as quickly as we possibly can? Because increasingly it's becoming apparent that this is needed now, not in 2030. So it's both a very exciting, very interesting place to be, and we're all very motivated to drive it forward.
Absolutely. I would be so excited to be involved in a project like that, where you're well funded, you've found a solution, and it's just a case of let's get there as fast as we can, right?
Yeah, there is the jeopardy to it that we need to move quickly, but it's a very, very exciting place to be. And as I said, it's just when you look at what the UK needs in terms of fighting climate change, whether it's for me at home or whether it's for industry that wants to produce its products as clean as it possibly can, we think we've got something that can play there. And just let me stress that there's no one way to do this. I'm a huge fan of all of the low carbon forms of energy, renewables, and what we've done in the UK on renewables is incredible. Yeah. It's absolutely amazing how far we've moved over the last 15 years. But for me, we've got to use everything. And I'm really excited to be somewhere where we think we can make a difference.
That was Harry Keeling there from Rolls-Royce, and he works on the engineering side of things rather than the selling of the cars. One day I'll have my own Rolls-Royce, but for now, not quite there yet, Marika. We can dream. But it's part of the energy mix. How important is heating?
It's very important, and also something we really need to look into in terms of innovation. Obviously, at the moment, we all have our own heating source in our sort of buildings, because that's how it's been done traditionally. But obviously, it would be much more efficient if we had one heating source and we then shared that heating source across a wide range of buildings. It's called heat networks. All of the major cities in the UK are really starting to look at that, because it would be more efficient and it would be cheaper as well for the customers if we had heat networks. The government has just published heat and building strategy, so that's really helping with driving the whole agenda forward. So I'm really interested in this whole project and what it could do.
So before we finish, if we're all looking to save energy, as we all are, could you give us some top tips on what we can each do in our homes to reduce our energy bills and therefore be a bit more environmentally friendly?
Yes, of course. So I think the first thing that I would do is I would check whether I can get an energy monitor. It costs around £10 to £15. Quite often you can borrow one from your local community group. You can then check how much energy you're using for each of your appliances. That's really interesting to see. Second thing that I would do is I would really look into LED lighting. It's a very easy thing to swap a light bulb and will make you quite a lot of savings. Once that's been done, then obviously really important thing to do is to look at the energy efficiency of your home. So windows, really important. The doors, letterboxes often let a lot of heat in, and there's simple devices that you can buy to make them more energy efficient. And then obviously, once all of that's been done, the more tricky things to do are things like underfloor insulation, external wall insulation, cavity loft insulation. That's really looking at the whole house and how you can insulate it as best as you can. So these are really the things that I would do in my own home. And I think we all need to start doing our bit in terms of home energy.
Emissions Impossible is a Connect production for UK Research and Innovation. If you like what you hear, please hit subscribe.